Hey everybody, it's me, your friendly neighborhood Uncle Pete, and welcome to this episode of my horror debate series that I collaborate with my good buddy Carlin Cook. In this horror debate series, we are debating a wide array of topics in the horror genre. Just like we did with the horror movies superlatives, after you watch my video, please watch Carlin's video, link in the description. Then go to the community tab on his page and vote for who you thought had the better argument, or if you thought it was a tie, you got three options. And let us know in the comments down below on what your stance on this topic is. We'd love to hear from you. And in this week's debate, we are discussing what is the best horror comic. Now, there's a lot of comics to choose from, but we can only select comics that we actually have read. But luckily, I read a lot of comic books. I am a big comic book nerd. Got over 5,000 comic books in my library. Love the hard copies of everything. So, big comic nerd, feeling right at home with this topic. So for me, out of all the horror comic books I've read, I believe that the best horror comic is The Sandman by Neil Gaiman. Now, I'm just going to be talking about The Sandman issues 1 through 8, or Volume 1, Preludes and Nocturnes. What makes a good horror comic? I think you need a few things. You need an interesting setting with elements that can instill fear. You need a protagonist that is relatable, someone you really want to root for. A story that has suspense, intrigue, even some twists and turns to make the story feel fresh. And probably one of the most important, you need a good villain, someone that represents fears we may have. When we see fears represented on on the screen or on paper, it kind of brings us into the story more like, man, I can understand why these characters are fearful, why this may be a challenge, so forth. You want a story where the hero may not get out alive if they don't make the right decisions. So those are some aspects that I believe makes a really good horror comic book. I feel that Neil Gaiman's The Sandman has all these elements which are done extremely well. The book starts with your basic horror story, but it does develop into something more special. With it's got a wonderful storytelling and themes, pages that make you read them again and again to get deeper into the story, to make sure you captured everything with the artwork and the dialogue. You have classic horror tropes that are presented in a way that don't feel stale. They feel fresh in this comic book. I don't think the story ever really gets boring, and the pacing is excellent. There's not too much filler in issues when you read this series. Each issue has something different to offer you, something new to add on to the story as it progresses forward. And you're eager to see where the plot is going. I mean, it feels like this book was made for adults who love horror and comic books. Basically, somebody just like me. So, The Sandman is a story about an entity called Morpheus who controls the place where everybody spends about one third of their life, sleep. Now, we can't escape sleep, and that's something relatable for all of us, and I think that can actually bring the reader deeper into the story. I do read a lot of comic books, and I know I just wrote a great issue when you get to the last page and you're disappointed that the issue is over and you have to wait a few weeks or the next month for another issue. I know I read a really good comic book. The first issue of Sandman ends with Morpheus getting released from his imprisonment, and he got revenge on the person who kept him there for like 72 years, I believe. It has a cathartic ending and a great way to end issue number 1 for a series. It's got a great starting point, and you get the feeling that the best is yet to come, and that's pretty much what happens as the story unfolds in The Sandman. I do love the artwork. The use of shadows and light on the characters and setting has a great horror feel to it. I love Morpheus's look. He's got this brooding quality, just the way that he's drawn. And when you see him, you can almost feel like this person's past. He's got like a dark past. And I kind of picked up the same thing in a similar way Frank Miller would draw his characters. Now, the artwork in this series is a great fit for horror, and you can just see about the character's personality in the way they are drawn, whether it's wrinkles, a brooding face, frown lines. You can see these characters have a history. And the artwork actually reminded me of old pulp horror comics such as Tales from the Crypt, The Vault of Horror, and The Haunt of Fear. There are classic horror themes in this series. Neil Gaiman unravels them in a way that feels fresh, even though these themes kind of seem familiar. I mean, you have magician who summons something that he was not ready for. There are curses of endless nightmares, people who sell their souls for success, and others who are ruined by their addictions. Kind of something a lot of people can, relate to in the horror genre. The Sandman is a comic book where you place yourself inside the story. It does a great job at drawing you in. I know I keep bringing that up because I love when a comic book really draws me into the story. There are disturbing moments in this series as well, and there are good amounts of gore. You have somebody's body that's inside out and turned into wallpaper, and this person is still alive somehow. And I feel like the scares affected me were the most ones where there's like there's no nonsense nature of what I was reading. Like there's no doubt that this is something horrific that's going on. There was nothing cutesy about it or light. Like no, this is something horrible happening to this person. And it makes you think that you're not safe in this Sandman universe because there are creatures with godlike powers who can kill you in an instant. But guess what? You're also not safe when you sleep. Now, I have to talk about one of the most impactful moments in the Sandman lore and one of the greatest horror comics, I would say, ever known, if you're really familiar. In issue number 6, you got an issue titled 24 Hours. John D., Dr. Destiny, visits a diner, and he's looking for his ruby, which belongs to Morpheus. But Morpheus found it first, but the ruby is now attuned to John, and it rejects Morpheus. So John gets this ruby, and his goal is to drive the whole world mad, and that's what he drives. He stops at a 24-hour diner now. The plot takes place over 24 hours at this diner, and after the setup, each page is 1 hour in these 24 hours. We meet all the patrons who visit the diner, and John uses this ruby to make everyone in the diner go mad. And this is just for his own enjoyment. And what happens to everybody is just wild. Eventually, he has them mutilate themselves in horrific ways. And like the way Neil Gaiman created this issue was something special. It was like relentless at times. It had dark and scary moments that really sticks with the reader long after you first read this issue. I mean, when you pick up the next issue, you're still in that mind space of the previous one, and it held you there because Jesus Christ, so much happened in that diner. It was a relentless, horror event for a comic book, and it was done extremely well. I liked how each page was just 1 hour. Something more horrific happened to each one of these patrons. I love the Sandman series. Like I said, I'm just talking about the first trade issues 1 through 8. I believe it goes to 75 issues. So yeah, one of the best horror comics I've read is the Sandman. It's got more than gore. It's got more than scares. It's got a great combination of everything you want in a good horror comic. It's got a villain that you just hate. It's got hero you want to root for. It's got gore. It has a little bit of humor. The artwork is great. Like I said, it's got an old 80s, not even 80s, when horror comics first came around, like I mentioned, Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror. It's got that feel to the artwork, and it kind of makes you think about those times where horror comics were really way more popular back then. Horror comics even caused the creation of the Comics Code Authority. But that's another story. I totally believe that Neil Gaiman's The Sandman is the best horror comic book I have ever read, which is why I picked it for my argument in this debate. Thanks again for watching. Appreciate you. So just want to wrap things up. Sandman is the best horror comic book, but to me, it's not just a comic book you read, it's a comic book you experience. Thanks again for watching. Now, please go to Carl's channel, link in the description. Watch his video with the same title. Then he'll have a community tab open on his page. And we would love if everybody would vote on who you thought had the better argument. Did I have the better one? Did he? Or did we tie? You got 3 options available. And don't forget to leave your pick in the comment section down below. That's my favorite part of doing a series like this, is interaction with the viewers, learning more about horror comics I may not have read, and hopefully introducing people into more comic books and the horror genre, which is what we love. So really appreciate it. And if you can, don't forget to hit that subscribe button on my channel and Carl's channel. We both put out a few videos a week, put a lot of hard work into it, and the greatest joy we get is when people subscribe and like our content. We love it. Thanks again, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Be good to each other. I am your friendly neighborhood Uncle Pete. And remember, with great kills, there must also come great nails.